Caleb McTavish coughed, the acrid smoke stinging his lungs as he scrambled over the shattered remains of a fence. Cannons roared, each blast shaking the earth beneath his worn boots. The air, thick with the stench of gunpowder and burning wood, made it hard to breathe. "Damn it all," he muttered, pushing a stray lock of sweat-soaked hair from his eyes. "Caleb!" "Over here!" A voice, strained but familiar, cut through the din. It was Finn, his childhood friend, crouching behind a toppled wagon. He sprinted towards the wagon, dodging a stray musket ball that whizzed past his ear. "What's the situation?" he asked, breathless as he dove behind the relative safety of the overturned wood. Finn, his face smudged with dirt and grime, pointed towards a distant rise. "Rebels are dug in deep. We gotta take that hill or we're done for." "Take it with what?" Caleb retorted, gesturing to the chaos around them. Men screamed, horses whinnied in terror, and the ground was littered with the dead and dying. The Union charge had clearly stalled. "Captain Davies wants a volunteer to scout ahead," Finn said grimly. "See if there's a weak point in their line." Caleb felt a chill crawl down his spine. Scouting ahead was a suicide mission, but he knew what was coming next. "He asked for you, Caleb?" "He asked for you, Caleb." Finn's words hung in the smoke-filled air. Heavy as the oppressive summer heat, Caleb stared at his friend, the reality of the situation sinking in. Captain Davies, a man who valued efficiency over human life, had chosen him. Not for his skill necessarily, but likely for his quiet obedience and his expendability. He was just another farm boy in a blue uniform. "Why me?" Caleb asked, his voice barely a whisper above the din of battle. Finn shrugged, a gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. "You're good at moving quiet. And you understand the land. He figures you'll spot something others won't." Understanding the land. Caleb knew the land, all right. He knew the gentle roll of the Virginia hills, the thickets of briars that could tear a man to shreds, the deceptively shallow creeks that could swallow a horse whole. But knowing the land wouldn't stop a mignonette ball, he thought of Sarah. Her face, etched in his memory, was a beacon in this swirling chaos. He pictured her tending their small garden, the sun catching the gold in her hair. A sudden, sharp pang of regret pierced his heart. He hadn't told her enough. Hadn't shown her enough. "Well?" Finn pressed, nudging him gently. "What do you say?" Caleb looked back towards the rise, the Confederate flag snapping defiantly in the breeze. It was a death sentence, plain and simple. But refusing was insubordination. And insubordination in wartime meant worse. He took a deep breath, the acrid smell of gunpowder burning his nostrils. "What are the specifics?" Finn visibly relaxed, a flicker of relief in his weary eyes. "He wants you to find a gap, a blind spot. Anything that can give us an edge when we charge again." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Here's a map. Rough, but it's something." Caleb unfolded the map, his fingers trembling slightly. It was a crude drawing, barely legible, showing the general layout of the hill and the supposed Confederate positions. It was more guesswork than gospel. "He wants you back before dusk," Finn continued. "And Caleb, be careful, careful," Caleb repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Right, careful it is." He tucked the map into his breast pocket, next to the letter he carried from Sarah, the one he read every night before trying to sleep. He checked his rifle, ensuring the powder was dry and the bayonet was secure. Then he took another deep breath and began to move, melting into the undergrowth like a shadow. The world narrowed to the immediate. Each step was measured, deliberate. He used the terrain to his advantage, crawling through the tall grass, keeping low to the ground. The sounds of battle faded slightly, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of unseen insects. He was alone. The Confederate lines were closer than he thought. He could hear their voices now, low and guttural, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. He risked a quick peek through the branches of a scrub oak. He saw them, a line of men clad in grey, lounging behind hastily constructed earthworks. Their rifles were stacked, their faces relaxed. They seemed confident, almost bored. Caleb moved further along the line, searching for the weakness Finn had mentioned. He saw nothing but solid defense. Men were positioned strategically, fields of fire were clear. There was no easy way through. As he crept forward, a glint of metal caught his eye. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a discarded tin can reflecting the sunlight. Someone had been here recently. And they were careless. He moved towards the can, his senses on high alert. He scanned the ground, looking for any other signs of activity. Then he saw it, a faint trail barely discernible in the undergrowth. It led away from the main Confederate line towards a dense thicket of trees. Could this be it? A back way? A forgotten path? Caleb hesitated. It was a risk. It could be a trap. But it was also the only lead he had. He took a deep breath and followed the trail, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. The thicket was dark and claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The trail narrowed, becoming little more than a game trail. He had to crawl on his hands and knees to make progress. Suddenly he heard a sound. A snapping twig. He froze, listening intently. It was close. Very close. He reached for his rifle, his fingers trembling. He was no longer the farm boy from Illinois. He was a soldier, and he was about to face the enemy. He reached for his rifle, his fingers trembling. He was no longer the farm boy from Illinois. He was a soldier, and he was about to face the enemy. Holding his breath, Caleb slowly pushed aside a curtain of thorny vines. His heart hammered against his ribs. Through the tangled leaves he saw him, a lone Confederate soldier, leaning against a tree, smoking a pipe. He was young, barely older than Caleb himself, with a weary look in his eyes. Caleb could take him. He had the element of surprise. One shot and it would be over, but something stopped him. The soldier looked so tired, so human. He lowered his rifle slightly. "Hold it right there," Caleb said, his voice rough, betraying his nervousness. The Confederate soldier jumped, dropping his pipe. His hand flew to his own weapon, a worn Enfield rifle. He stared at Caleb, his eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Who's there?" the soldier rasped, his voice thick with a southern drawl. "Union," Caleb replied, stepping fully into the clearing, his rifle still trained on the man. "Put down your weapon slowly." The Confederate hesitated, his eyes darting around, assessing the situation. He was clearly outnumbered, or at least he assumed so. With a sigh, he slowly lowered his rifle to the ground. "All right, Yankee," he said, raising his hands in the air. "You got me. Just don't shoot." Caleb kept his rifle trained on the soldier. "What's your name?" "Thomas," the soldier replied. "Thomas Ashton." "And you?" "Caleb," he responded, still wary. He didn't lower his rifle. "What are you doing out here alone?" Thomas shrugged. "Scouting. Got separated from my unit. Figured I'd try and find my way back." Caleb studied him closely. He was either telling the truth or a damn good liar. "What unit?" "The 7th Virginia," Thomas said. "Under General Kemper." Caleb knew the name. Kemper's brigade had been giving the Union Army hell for weeks. He lowered his rifle a fraction. "So why aren't you fighting?" Thomas's face hardened, a flicker of anger crossing his features. "I come fighting. For my home. For my family." He spat on the ground. "Something you Yankees wouldn't understand." Caleb remained silent for a moment. He understood fighting for family. That's why he was here. He thought of Sarah back home in Illinois and the promise he made to her. He thought of Sullivan Ballou's letter, the words etched in his mind. "My love for you is deathless. Kurt seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break." "Where were you headed?" Caleb asked, changing the subject. "Towards Manassas," Thomas replied. "Trying to rejoin my regiment." Caleb knew that direction. It was exactly where he was headed, following the slim lead he had on the Confederate supply route. This could be his chance, a guide, albeit an unwilling one. "I'm headed that way too," Caleb said. "You're going to help me," Thomas frowned. "Help you? I'd rather die." "Maybe you will," Caleb said, his voice cold. "But not before you tell me everything you know about the Confederate supply lines in this area." And about Kemper's plans. Thomas stared at Caleb, his eyes filled with hate. He knew he was trapped. "What makes you think I'll tell you anything?" Thomas sneered. Caleb smiled, a grim, humorless expression. "Because you don't want to die here alone in the middle of nowhere. You want to see your family again, don't you? You want to go home." He saw the flicker of hope in Thomas's eyes, quickly masked by defiance. Caleb pressed his advantage. "Start talking, Ashton," Caleb said, raising his rifle slightly, "or I'll find someone else who will." The lie hung heavy in the air. He had no one else. This was his only chance. "Start talking, Ashton," Caleb said, raising his rifle slightly, "or I'll find someone else who will." The lie hung heavy in the air. He had no one else. This was his only chance. Thomas spat on the muddy ground. You think you're so righteous. Soldier, you think you're on the side of angels? I think you're helping men tear this country apart, Caleb countered, his voice low and dangerous. And I want to know why. Who's paying you? Paying? Thomas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think it's about money? You simple-minded fool. It's about states' rights. It's about freedom from your Yankee tyranny. Caleb sighed inwardly. He'd expected this rhetoric. Freedom to own other human beings. Is that the freedom you're fighting for, Ashton? He saw the man flinch, a subtle tightening of his jaw. He was getting to him. It's about principle, Thomas insisted, though the conviction in his voice seemed to waver. You wouldn't understand. Caleb lowered his rifle slightly, a calculated move to appear less threatening. Then help me understand. Tell me about these principles. Tell me about what happened at Blackburn's Ford. He watched Thomas closely, gauging his reaction. Blackburn's Ford. The name alone seemed to rattle him. Thomas's eyes darted around nervously. I wasn't there. Don't lie to me, Ashton, Caleb snapped, raising the rifle again. I know you were. I saw you. Another lie, but it seemed to have the desired effect. All right, Thomas relented, his voice barely a whisper. I was there. But I didn't. I didn't do anything wrong. Wrong? Caleb scoffed. Men died there, Ashton. Good men. Men like Sullivan Ballou. Did you see him there? Thomas looked down, avoiding his gaze. I don't remember any Ballou. Caleb pressed forward, sensing his weakness. He was a major, Ashton, a lawyer. He wrote a letter to his wife, Sarah, a week before. A beautiful letter. Did you read it? He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He died there, Ashton. He died for what he believed in. What did you do? Thomas remained silent, his face pale. The rain continued to fall, plastering his hair to his forehead. He looked defeated, broken. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. We were ordered to hold the ford, to stop them from crossing. And? Caleb prompted, his heart pounding. There was a miscommunication, Thomas stammered. Some of our men fired too soon. It turned into a slaughter. A slaughter, Caleb repeated, his voice flat. And you were a part of it. I didn't kill anyone, Thomas insisted, his voice rising in desperation. I swear I didn't fire a shot. Caleb didn't believe him, but he needed more. Who gave the order to fire? Thomas hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. I can't say. You can't say. Caleb's grip tightened on his rifle. Or you won't say? Who are you protecting, Ashton? Someone high up? Thomas shook his head frantically. It doesn't matter. It's over now. The battle's lost. The war is lost. It's not over, Caleb said, his voice firm. Not until I know the truth. Who gave the order? He leaned closer, his eyes boring into Thomas's. Tell me, Ashton. Or so help me, I'll make you wish you had died at Bull Run. The threat hung heavy in the air. Caleb could see the fear in Thomas's eyes, the desperation to survive. He knew he was close. He could almost taste it. Tell me, Ashton. Or so help me, I'll make you wish you had died at Bull Run. Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced around the deserted field hospital. The moans of the wounded a macabre symphony. It wasn't an order exactly. Caleb's brow furrowed. What do you mean, not exactly? It was a suggestion. Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. A strong suggestion. From General McDowell himself. Caleb felt a cold dread creep into his gut. McDowell? The Union commander, why? A suggestion to do what, Ashton? Spit it out. To hold that position. To not retreat, no matter what. Thomas's eyes welled up with tears. He said it was vital. That holding that ground would break the Confederate line. He promised reinforcements. Said we were the key to victory. And the reinforcements never came. Caleb finished, the bitterness coating his words. Thomas shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. They never came. We were slaughtered, left to die. Caleb released his grip on his rifle, the wood suddenly feeling heavy in his hand. McDowell, the man responsible for so many deaths, hidden behind a suggestion. It was almost worse than a direct order. Deniability. He could wash his hands of the carnage, claim he hadn't explicitly ordered the men to their doom. Why are you telling me this? Caleb asked, suspicion still lacing his voice. Thomas looked up, his gaze meeting Caleb's. Because Sullivan deserved better. You all did. He talked about you, Caleb, about your friendship, about how you both dreamed of a better America. He believed in what we were fighting for. He paused, choking back a sob. He died believing in it. The mention of Sullivan hit Caleb like a physical blow. Sullivan with his kind eyes and unwavering optimism. Sullivan who wrote letters filled with poetry and hope, even in the face of death. Sullivan who believed so fiercely in the Union cause. The same Sullivan who penned the now famous words, "My love for you is eternal." He thought of Sarah, Sullivan's wife. She'd be devastated. Caleb felt a surge of anger, hotter and more potent than anything he had felt on the battlefield. It wasn't just the Confederates who were the enemy. It was the men in power, the ones who sent soldiers like Sullivan and him to their deaths with careless suggestions and empty promises. "What now, Caleb?" Thomas asked, his voice laced with despair. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the battlefield, the smoke still rising from the charred ground, the bodies of the fallen scattered like discarded toys. The air hung heavy with the stench of death and decay. He thought of what Sullivan would have wanted. Revenge? Maybe. But more than that, he would have wanted justice. He would have wanted the truth to be known. "I'm going to tell people," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. "I'm going to tell everyone what McDowell did. What he orchestrated." Thomas's eyes widened. "You can't. He'll deny it. He'll crush you." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but someone has to. Sullivan deserves that much." He knew it would be a dangerous path. McDowell was a powerful man, protected by the very system that Caleb was trying to expose. But he couldn't stand by and let Sullivan's death and the deaths of so many others be in vain. "But who will believe you?" Thomas asked, fear still evident in his voice. "You're just a private." "He's a general." "I don't know," Caleb admitted. "But I have to try. I owe it to Sullivan. I owe it to all the men who died out there believing they were fighting for something real." He looked at Thomas, his gaze unwavering. "Will you help me, Ashton? Will you testify to what you heard?" Thomas hesitated again, his internal struggle evident on his face. He was caught between his fear of McDowell and his conscience, between self-preservation and the desire for justice. Finally, he took a deep breath and met Caleb's gaze. I don't know if I'm strong enough," he confessed, "but I can't live with this on my conscience anymore. If you can find a way to make people listen, I'll tell them what I heard." A flicker of hope ignited within Caleb. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. He wasn't alone. "Thank you, Ashton," Caleb said, extending his hand. "Thank you." Thomas shook his hand, his grip firm. "Be careful, Caleb. McDowell won't let you get away with this easily." "I know," Caleb said, "but I'm not afraid. I have the truth on my side. And I have Sullivan's memory to guide me." He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. He would face opposition, ridicule, and possibly even danger. But he was determined to see justice done, to honor the memory of his friend, and to expose the truth behind the carnage at Bull Run. The love Sullivan Ballou had enshrined would not be forgotten. "Be careful how you wield it," Thomas cautioned, his voice low. "Truth can be a sharp blade, Caleb. It cuts both ways." Caleb nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. He knew that revealing the extent of the incompetence at Bull Run would have far-reaching consequences, potentially destroying careers and reputations. It was a dangerous game he was playing. "I understand," Caleb replied, his gaze meeting Ashton's, "but some things are more important than reputations." He paused, his voice hardening. "Sullivan deserves the truth to be known." The cold of the barn seemed to seep into his bones as he spoke. He pulled his threadbare coat tighter. The frost bit through leather that was already cracking. He needed to leave. Lingering here would only invite trouble. "I should go," Caleb said, turning towards the barn door. "Thank you again, Ashton, for everything." Ashton placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, stopping him. "Where will you go?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "McDowell will be watching for you. I have a few contacts," Caleb said vaguely. He didn't want to involve Ashton any further than he already was. The man had risked enough. "I'll be fine." He forced a smile, hoping it looked convincing. He needed to project confidence, even though fear gnawed at him. The weight of Sullivan's memory, the weight of the truth pressed down on him. "Just be careful," Ashton repeated. his grip tightening briefly before releasing Caleb. "And if you need anything at all, send word." Caleb nodded, then stepped out of the barn and into the biting wind. The sun was beginning to set, casting long skeletal shadows across the frozen fields. He pulled his hat lower over his eyes and started walking, his boots crunching on the icy ground. He had to think. He had to plan. He had to find a way to expose the truth without getting himself killed in the process. He knew McDowell's reach was long and his influence considerable. He would need to be discreet and he would need to be clever. He thought of Sullivan's letter, the beautiful aching words penned to Sarah, the promise of eternal love. That love, that sacrifice, fueled his resolve. He headed towards Alexandria. He had a contact there, a printer who'd quietly supported the Union cause before the war, a man who valued truth, and a man who owed Caleb a favor. He hoped the man would still be willing to help, even with the risks involved. The journey was arduous. The cold intensified as night fell, and the constant fear of being discovered gnawed at his nerves. He avoided main roads, sticking to back paths and wooded areas, moving like a ghost through the ravaged landscape. He saw signs of the war everywhere, abandoned farms, burned-out buildings, and the hollow stares of refugees wandering aimlessly. The human cost of the conflict was staggering, a constant reminder of the stakes. He reached Alexandria late the next day, exhausted and half frozen. He found the printer's shop, tucked away on a narrow, cobbled street. The sign above the door, barely legible, read, "Elias Thorne, Printer." He hesitated for a moment, then pushed open the door and stepped inside. The shop was small and cluttered, filled with the smell of ink and paper. An older man with spectacles perched on his nose was bent over a printing press, his hands stained with ink. He looked up as Caleb entered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Caleb? Is that you?" Elias Thorne asked, his voice raspy. "Elias," Caleb replied, relief washing over him. "It's been a long time. What brings you here?" Elias asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "It's not safe for you in these parts." "I need your help, Elias," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. "I have something I need to print. Something important." Elias looked at him, his eyes filled with concern. "What is it?" he asked. Caleb hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out the crumpled copy of Sullivan Ballou's letter and the documents he'd gathered. "The truth," he said. "About Bull Run." Elias took the documents, his eyes scanning them quickly. His face grew grim. "This is dangerous," he said, looking up at Caleb. "Very dangerous." "I know," Caleb said, "but it needs to be done." Elias sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "All right," he said. "I'll help you. But you need to understand the risks. If we're caught—" "I know the risks," Caleb interrupted. "I'm willing to take them." He thought of Sullivan, of the letter that echoed with love and loss. He had to do this. "Then let's get to work," Elias said, his voice resigned but determined. He gestured towards the printing press. "We don't have much time." The small printing press groaned and clanked as Elias fed the paper through, carefully setting each letter, each word. Caleb watched him, his heart pounding in his chest. He was one step closer to exposing the truth, one step closer to honoring Sullivan's memory. But he knew that McDowell wouldn't sit idly by. He was certain that he was being hunted, that the noose was slowly tightening around him. He just hoped he could get the truth out before it was too late. He had to ensure Sullivan's "My love for you is eternal" would ring through history, not be silenced by political maneuverings. Caleb knew McDowell would retaliate. It came swiftly. Within days, whispers turned to accusations. Caleb was a traitor, a sympathizer, a coward seeking to undermine the Union. The army brass, eager to bury Bull Run's shame, seized on the opportunity. Caleb was summoned to a tribunal. The hearing was a farce. McDowell's officers, their faces grim masks, presented flimsy evidence. Caleb countered each charge with facts, with witness accounts Ashton and others had bravely provided, and with the undeniable truth. Bull Run was a disaster born of incompetence. He spoke of Sullivan, of his unwavering patriotism, of the letter that spoke of love even in the face of death, a love betrayed by needless sacrifice. "They say I dishonor the Union," Caleb declared, his voice ringing through the tent. "But what dishonors it more? To speak the truth of what happened there, or to bury the bodies and the mistakes? leaving the families of men like Sullivan Ballou to mourn in ignorance. The tribunal adjourned. Days bled into weeks. Caleb remained confined, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Then one rain-soaked morning the verdict arrived. He was to be stripped of his rank, publicly disgraced and dismissed from the army. Ashton found him in his cell, his face etched with worry. "They've broken you, haven't they?" Caleb shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "No, Ashton, they haven't. They've given me something far more valuable." He held up a crumpled piece of parchment, a copy of Sullivan's letter, smuggled to him by a sympathetic guard. "Oh, they tried to silence me, but they cannot silence this. They cannot silence the truth, or the love it represents." The day of his public shaming dawned grey and oppressive. A small crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and contempt. McDowell stood on a raised platform, his gaze cold and unforgiving. As the charges were read, Caleb stood tall, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, as the officer moved to tear the insignia from his uniform, a voice rang out, "Stop!" A woman pushed through the crowd, her face pale but determined. It was Sarah Ballou, Sullivan's widow. Behind her stood a growing contingent, soldiers who had fought at Bull Run, families who had lost loved ones, and ordinary citizens who had heard whispers of the truth. "This man," Sarah declared, her voice trembling but clear, "speaks for my husband. He speaks for all the men who died at Bull Run. He speaks for the truth." One by one others added their voices. Soldiers recounted the chaos, the lack of leadership, the senseless slaughter. Families spoke of their grief, their unanswered questions, their need for closure. The crowd, initially hostile, began to shift, their murmurs of disapproval turning to whispers of understanding. McDowell's face turned crimson with rage. He ordered his men to disperse the crowd, but they hesitated, their loyalty divided. They had seen the carnage, felt the fear, and heard the stories. They knew the truth. Seeing the tide turning, Caleb stepped forward. He pulled out Sullivan's letter, his voice resonating across the square. He read the words of love, of sacrifice, of devotion to country, and of the haunting premonition of death. "My love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break." When he finished, silence fell over the crowd. Then slowly, deliberately, a single soldier stepped forward and removed his cap. Others followed suit. A low murmur rose, a collective sigh of recognition and respect. McDowell, defeated and humiliated, stormed away. The charges against Caleb were dropped. He was a free man. He didn't rejoin the army. The war raged on, but Caleb's battle had been different. He dedicated himself to honoring the fallen, to ensuring that the mistakes of Bull Run were never repeated. He became a tireless advocate for the families of the lost, helping them find closure and justice. Years passed. The war ended. The nation began to heal. Caleb remained a quiet figure, a keeper of memories, a guardian of truth. One autumn evening, years later, Caleb found himself standing on a hill overlooking a small cemetery. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rows of white headstones. He knelt before a simple marker bearing the name Sullivan Ballou. He placed a single wildflower on the grave, its petals a vibrant splash of color against the gray stone. He thought of Sullivan's letter, of the enduring power of love, of the sacrifices made in the name of a nation. He had come to understand that love, like truth, could not be silenced. It echoed through time, a beacon of hope in the darkest of nights. He had honored Sullivan's memory, not by seeking revenge, but by ensuring that his love, his sacrifice, and his truth were never forgotten. Caleb rose, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. He turned and walked away, his steps light, his heart filled with a quiet peace. He carried Sullivan's love within him, a constant reminder